It's 10 o'clock on Friday the 12th of February. Good and welcome. Welcome to this Insights seminar that's dedicated to the adventure tourism sector. I'm Chris Foy, I'm Chief Executive at Visit Aberdeenshire, although we are but one cog in the wheel of a new initiative that is under development, North East Adventure Tourism, working alongside Aberdeenshire Council, Scottish Enterprise, Scottish Cycling and led by Opportunity North East. More on that in a moment, but before we go any further, I'll just do the housekeeping. You've joined the seminar on mute, and you'll have to unmute to participate in discussions when you join some breakout rooms in 2 sessions later on. More on that to come. You can unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone symbol at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see controls, tap on your screen, move your mouse, and things should appear in front of you. I'm sure many of you know you can change the layout of the video by selecting speaker view or gallery view according to your preference as to who you want to see. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the seminar by using the chat function at the bottom of your screen, that's centre left. Please include your name and your business name when you're putting a question into the chat function. This will be monitored. The questions will be monitored during the presentation, and we'll respond to all questions at the end, time permitting. We're recording, so we will send you the link in the next few days, edited version, so you can catch up on anything that you want to catch up on from the session today. Now, should the signal drop for any reason or the webinar pauses, you'll receive an email shortly afterwards with details of the next step. We've had a little time to dig into some of the key themes in breakouts, and we'll advise you how that will work when we get there. Right, the ambition of the North East Adventure Tourism Initiative is to develop the sector here in this part of Scotland with a vision to have a region recognised as a world-class net zero destination for adventure activities by 2030. There are, of course, many variables that will contribute to achieving that goal, but with so many other things in business, the customer will be one, if not the critical factor. So that is not a bad place to start, and that brings us to today. In 2020, around about summer, autumn last year, we commissioned some research among some profiled audiences in Scotland and Northern England to assess the profile of the adventure tourism market and what would motivate this market to choose the northeast of Scotland, and also how best to communicate our offer with visitors who have such ambitions. The outcome of that commission is the insight we'll be hearing about today, and that is my cue to introduce today's speakers, Jim Eccleston and Duncan Stewart from 56 Degree Insight, who undertook the work for us. Both Jim and Duncan have unrivaled experience in tourism research, having worked across the UK during the course of their careers. Their work last summer, I think it's fair to say, in the development and the implementation of the Scottish Tourism Index was a godsend for many of us in the sector, particularly those of us in the marketing side, as we try to navigate our way through the fog of unknown consumer behaviour in the face of the pandemic. Many of you will have heard Jim Duncan present on that work at the back end of last year, including a focus on the perceptions of Aberdeen after the local lockdown. But today we're looking ahead, and we're looking ahead to far more positive times, growth of a sector with such great potential. So at that point, gents, I'll pass over to you, and we look forward to the presentation and discussion.
Thank you very much, Chris. Very kind words and very much appreciated. I'm going to share my screen now, folks, so please bear with me. Hopefully you can see my screen. We're very excited to share the results with you today. It's a very important study, a very difficult time for everybody, and hopefully does give pointers for the way, some of the messaging and some of the things that can be done as we come out of the pandemic and businesses are able to start trading properly again. There are lots of opportunities there, and I think there's a lot of positive messages to come from this presentation and this workshop today. But I won't jump ahead. I'll let you be the judges of that as we go forward. So yeah, myself, Jim Eccleston and Duncan Stewart, we've been around for rather a long time, sometimes longer than you care to remember, and worked both client side and agency side. I mean, my career started in Scottish Tourist Board in the 1990s, and I spent many years there in the research and insights department. Duncan joined me there as well. And then we moved agency side and worked for TNS and System 3 and Kantar, eventually heading up the Kantar offering in Scotland. It provided us with a lot of opportunity to engage with the tourism sector. Tourism is our background. It's the area that we know and love best, if you like. And we ran the Great Britain Tourism Survey and the Great Britain Day Visit surveys for the National Tourist Boards when we were at TNS and Kantar. We formed 56 Degree Insight a couple of years ago now. It's amazing how time flies, and yes, we've been very active in a lot of tourism work over that time. And thank you for mentioning the Scottish Tourism Index, Chris, which we found to be a useful thing to be doing last year. We felt we were able to give something back to the industry, and just on that, just very quickly, we're hoping to run another wave of that in the next month or so, just to see how people are feeling about tourism in Scotland for 2021. So keep a watch out for that, because that will be coming soon. But back to today, in terms of what we're going to cover today, the last thing we want to do is just to present lots and lots of findings to you, and then you switch off your computers and go back to your day job. It's really important that we make today as interactive as possible and hear from each of you about your reactions to what you're seeing, and also how it impacts on you as a business and how relevant it is for you as a business. So we've deliberately built in a couple of breakout sessions, and we'll come on to those in a few moments, to allow you to question, to ask various questions, to discuss, to offer other points of view, and so on, and hopefully make it as engaging and interactive as possible. I'm going to do the first part of the actual presentation, so the introduction to the opportunity, if you like, afforded by for adventure tourism in the Northeast. We'll then have a breakout session, which is more of an introduction to each of you. We're going to have 4 different groups amongst all the delegates today, and 4 of us will moderate these groups. And this first one's more of a introduction from yourselves about what adventure tourism means to you and any initial reactions and so on. Then Duncan will come back and talk you through the real meat of the survey results, the factors that influence destination choice amongst adventure tourists. And where does Aberdeenshire sit within that competitive market? And what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the things that need to be tackled to optimise adventure tourism opportunity in the Northeast? How can we develop the product? And one thing that you'll see as we go through the presentation, it's impossible to go down to the nth level of detail in every single slide today about every single result, but the results from this survey are available, and the links will be available for you after today's workshop. And we've produced different summaries for different activity groups. There's about 10 different summary sets of results for mountain biking, for water sports, etc., etc. So there's lots and lots of different detail in there. We can only touch the surface of it today, but bear in mind that detail is there. And then our second set of breakouts, we're all going to cover different areas. I won't cover too much on that just now. We'll come on to that a little bit later. So I think it's important just to understand exactly what our remit was for this study. Basically, you need to know more about adventure tourism and the potential of adventure tourism in the area, and who are the visitors likely to be. What can you do more? So we actually split that down into 3 separate sets of objectives, if you like, within the study. The first one, what's the profile of the adventure tourism market, and the profile of the market that would consider Aberdeenshire, which is important. It's not just the market overall. Their demographics, where do they live, their lifestyle, their attitudes to travel generally, especially around the period of COVID, and how does this vary by activity type? And then in the second column on the slide there, what would motivate this market to choose the Northeast for adventure tourism? What are the primary triggers relating to activities? What are the secondary triggers? It's often a whole bunch of secondary things that make a difference about how people choose a destination: accommodation, food and drink, other things you can do while you're in the area. And what is the specific appeal of Aberdeenshire? We really probed into a lot of detail on this to really understand what are the triggers that you should be focusing on when you're promoting your own business, and when Aberdeenshire promotes the area as an adventure tourism destination. And obviously, what time of year would particularly appeal for a visit. And then the third bucket there, how to communicate with the market in campaigns? What are the messages that communication should focus on, and which media channels should we be using? So there's a lot to cover. There was a lot to cover within the research, and to do that, we undertook it using an online approach, using an online panel by Dynata, who are one of the big consumer panel providers in the UK, and basically they have several 100,000 consumers readily available to undertake surveys, and we can say to them, right, we need a specific segment of people that we want to speak to. If you can give that to us, you can basically find these people. This is the questionnaire we want you to post with each of those. So basically, we're able to find a segment of the population of interest. And the segment we were interested in was obviously people who would consider adventure tourism. So we'll come on to that in a second. But we undertook over 800 interviews, and the geographical focus of our sample was obviously Scotland. We were interested in, from an Aberdeenshire perspective, Scotland represents the lowest hanging fruit in terms of availability and proximity. So half the interviews were undertaken with Scots or with Scottish residents, and the other half were in Northern England. We deliberately chose the north of England because obviously that's the next most readily available domestic tourism segment that's available. Clearly we could go further afield and so on, but obviously we've got to think about Aberdeenshire and the northeast position, geographical location, and what might be realistic. So we focused very much on that northern half of the UK, if you like. And everybody we spoke to had to be what we call a non-rejecter of holidays or short breaks to destinations north of the central belt in Scotland. There's no point in speaking to somebody in Leeds who would never, ever consider going anywhere north of Edinburgh, because you're never going to be able to attract them to the northeast, or it's going to be very, very difficult to do so. So that was the first caveat, or the first criteria. The second one was the main purpose of that trip would be one of a number of outdoor type activities. So walking, cycling, mountain biking, water sports. We couldn't cover every single activity there, but we tried to cover a breadth of outdoor pursuits that represent the adventure tourism, generally represent the adventure tourism market. So bear in mind as we look at the results, all these people are warm, they're all adventure tourists, or people who undertake activity holidays, basically, where the activity is the main purpose. None of them would reject coming north of the central belt in Scotland. Doesn't mean that they would immediately think they would do, and that's part of the challenge, but nobody would outwardly reject the idea of coming north of the central belt. So whether it's for a holiday, a longer holiday, or a short break. So that was the segment that we were looking at within this study. So I'll come back to some of the results in a second, but it's important, I think, just to take a very quick look at the adventure tourism opportunity. There's no doubt that it provides a huge and growing opportunity to the northeast, but also for Scotland in general. There's lots of research that shows the desire to be active and get off the beaten track is on the rise. And the outlook of people is very different to a few years ago. They're a lot younger, in inverted commas. They go to the gym and to fitness boot camps. It's all about activity and active. That is more and more, it's a growing trend that we're all aware of. And people are also booking multi-generational adventure experiences to create memories with their family. So it's becoming quite a mainstream thing to do. It's been filling some of the demand for variety as a typical duration of a beach holiday is gradually reduced from 2 weeks to one, and many want one holiday to switch off. Then they want a cultural or an active holiday or an achievement holiday to stimulate them. So it's becoming more mainstream. People's perception of what adventure means in terms of travel are definitely evolving. It doesn't necessarily mean high octane activities like bungee jumping or rock climbing. Things like cycling and walking holidays can be considered adventurous too. Adventure is how the consumer defines it themselves. And there's a really interesting quote from an international adventure sports operator I'd like to share with you. The wider trend of experience-led travel is also feeding into activity holidays. Customers are yearning for experiences as well as adventure. There's a growing interest in combining the primary activity of the trip, walking or cycling, for example, with other experiences such as food, sightseeing, or photography. And as new audiences enter the adventure market, they're looking for comfort too. Adventure doesn't have to mean roughing it. I think that's a really important point. This whole rise in experiential tourism, adventure tourism got a big part to play in that. And let's not forget the bottom line. Not only are adventure and activity holidays a growing sector, they tend to be fit, healthy, and affluent, and will travel well into their 60s on active holidays. And this results in higher levels of repeat bookings, which makes it a very lucrative sector. So there's lots of potential in this area, but let's move things a little bit closer to home. Now, Chris has already mentioned the Scottish Tourism Index, and I thought I'd just quick, before we look at the results from this survey, quickly share one of the findings that we picked up in that survey over the summer. So we asked people about the activities. This was Scots who were considering holidays in Scotland last year, post initial lockdown, if you like, and people's horizons were very much Scotland. What was going to be different about that trip from normal? And what we discovered, if you look on the right-hand side of the chart, generally people were more likely to be considering visiting the natural outdoors, rest and relaxation, and importantly, active outdoor pursuits. People wanted to be doing things outdoors last year for lots of reasons that we can all imagine around it being healthier, it being safer rather than being indoors, etc., etc. So that last year was a good year in terms of moving people in the direction that we want them to go. And you'll see on the left-hand side, we actually asked people in August about the holidays they'd taken since after tourism reopened mid-July, over that 6-week period, what sorts of activities they undertook. And you can see there, fourth one down, active outdoor pursuits was one of the key things that people were doing. So there's a lot of movement last year in the right direction. And generally, we're finding that people are considering this is the way they want to go forward with their holidays. It's not necessarily a one-off. I mean, it could be ironically, there could be some benefits from lockdown and from the situation we're in at the moment that will benefit adventure tourism as we go forward. So back to the survey that we undertook in September last year. So it was just after the main summer season for what it was. To obtain a representative sample reflecting the adventure tourism market, the survey recruitment criteria ensured that all respondents would consider taking part in one or more of the following pursuits. So hill walking or rambling, and 92% would consider that. Cycling, 50%. Water sports, 35% would consider that. Mountain biking, 26%. Climbing, 22%. So these were the things that we asked people, that people had to consider before they were eligible for our survey. So given this criteria, if you look at what's on the screen, it's not surprising to see that the large percentage of respondents had taken part in a number of outdoor pursuits during the last 12 months. Notably, over half had taken part in walking, including 77% undertaking short, low-level walks, which is less than 5 miles, with both longer distance low-level walks and hill walking undertaken by just over 3 and 5. So these are the big activities on the left-hand side of the chart. But other activities undertaken in the previous 12 months by more than a quarter of the people who were in our sample included bird watching, off-road cycling, running in a natural place, cycling on roads. But most respondents had taken part in multiple activities during this last year, an average of 5 each. So these are active people. These are people that are very much in your target market. Now, there's a real danger that, and I'm sure this must annoy a lot of you working in this sector, of lumping everybody into one box, adventure tourists or activity tourists or whatever. Of course, we all know that's not appropriate. Every activity has different appeals and so on. Now, while by necessity and the time available, we can't look at each activity within this presentation, we have grouped people into these 3 different segments, if you like, of the market for this presentation. So what we've called soft adventure, which accounted for 10% of our samples, though only previously taken part in less demanding activities on day trips and holidays. So they tend to be short walks, bird or wildlife watching, and so on. So very much on the soft end of adventure tourism. Then the moderate adventure one, which is about 40%, taking part in potentially fairly demanding activities on day trips and holidays, hill walking, longer walks, cycling on roads or trails, and then hard adventure. So this is half our sample, basically: water sports, mountaineering, rock climbing, mountain biking, snow sports, fishing, running in a natural place, horse riding, lots of activities that were, combined were maybe a bit more intensive. So how did the demographics vary of the people we spoke to? Well, we can see here that first of all, the market's broadly reflective of the general population in terms of age and life stage. If you look at the proportions who are 18 to 34, 35 to 44, and so on the left-hand side, It does vary, however, by the extent to which people are soft, moderate, or hard adventure tourists, if you like. And not surprisingly, those who are more into the harder end of things tend to be younger, etc. Fairly obvious stuff, but there is information in there by activity as well. In terms of socio-economic group, not huge variations, but those who were more likely to take part in the hard activities were more likely to be slightly more affluent, more likely to be ABs, 49% ABs, which is the higher socio-economic groups. But very much reflective of the holiday market generally in terms of that affluence. And obviously, we were also able to look at, on the bottom right, at Visit Scotland's Adventure Seekers segment. It's worth looking at this segment in more detail. There's lots of information on the Visit Scotland website on this. And what we did find there, not surprisingly, that those who qualified as adventure seekers were particularly likely to be hard adventure tourists as opposed to soft adventure tourists, but they very much fit that the criteria we would expect. So a wide range of print and online information sources were used for planning participation in outdoor activities and seeking inspiration, especially amongst those in the hard adventure segment who are more likely to use most of the sources asked about. So you can see the websites that were used, but you can see that those who are in the hard category, the percentages are slightly higher for especially the likes of Walk Highlands, Walking Britain websites, and others as well, Go for a Walk, ramblers.org.uk, etc. And social media usage is a key source of information. 26% would use Instagram, 22% Twitter, 60% Facebook, 6% YouTube. So yeah, they're not, it's not the majority, but large proportions. And again, those who take part in activities in the hard segment are more likely to use most of those, especially Instagram with the photographic opportunities, Facebook, and to a certain extent Twitter as well. And they tended to follow a lot of key accounts in terms of people who are very much influencers, so Bear Grylls, Chris Packham, etc., etc. So we've got a lot of information like that in the survey. And in terms of the magazines used or read, you can again see what's there. So there's a lot of information on that, and we have that broken down by activity within the actual report itself. So these are the types of people that we were speaking to. They also were, I mean, over 2 in 5 were members of one or more of the organisations listed in this chart here. This varied from 41% of Scots to 48% of Northern England residents. So especially in the north of England, almost half the people we were speaking to were members of one of these organisations. So the organisations, I won't read them all out, but especially National Trust or National Trust for Scotland, RSPB, Historic Scotland English Heritage, Wildlife Trust, etc., etc. So there's lots of potential partnerships in there as well that you should think about when it comes to the sector. So that's a very quick introduction to the types of people we spoke to. It's not, there's an awful lot more information coming from Duncan when we get after the first breakout session, but we thought it was useful just to give you a feel for why we were doing this, what we were trying to do, and a little bit of information about the types of people we were speaking to. So on that point, I'm going to introduce the first breakout session. This is a chance for each of you to say a few words about yourself. What we're keen to do is we're breaking it on to 4 different groups. There's 4 of us going to moderate each group, and we've got 15 minutes here, and we're literally going to ask each of you in the group to introduce yourself and your business, what your interest in adventure tourism is, activities that you promote and that you provide, and any reflections, quick reflections on what you've heard so far, or anything you want to say at this point, basically. Anything expected or unexpected so far, or surprising. Now, you've not seen many results, so I wouldn't expect there to be too much here, but if there is something you want to share, please, this is an opportunity to do so.
Welcome back. I think we're over to Duncan now.
Thank you very much, Chris. Hopefully you can all hear me and see my screen. That was great having a little chat there with everyone. Thank you so much from the guys in my group. It was a good introduction, and we'll be getting back together later on to talk a bit more about the insights which we've shown you, and the ones I'm going to go into a bit more detail on just now. So for this next part of the presentation, I'll be going into more detail to help us to sort of better understand what we need to do to attract the adventure tourism market to Aberdeenshire. And we're going to start with some findings regarding the factors that influence this market when they're deciding where to visit. So First of all, this chart illustrates the benefits consumers hope to gain from an adventure holiday experience. Not just thinking of Aberdeenshire, but more broadly, when they're taking and planning this type of trip, what is it they seek to get from this? And so people who take adventure holidays, they seek a wide range of benefits from the experience, but the highest percentages that we recorded were relating to seeing and enjoying scenery and wildlife, the chance to relax and unwind, have fun, and to go somewhere that's peaceful and quiet. But what people wanted to get from the experience also did vary within the market, as we've tried to highlight in the table under the bar chart. So, for example, those people at the softer end of the market are more likely to say that the most important things are enjoying scenery and wildlife. However, when you get into the harder sort of adventure experience participants, they're more likely to say things like they want to try something new, or they want to be able to challenge themselves. So to explore this a bit further, we also asked our respondents an open-ended question. So people type things in order for us to get a really top of mind unprompted response on this particular question. And we asked them what factors were most important to them when they were deciding on where to go on an activity holiday. So as the word cloud shows, we got a real wide range of different answers, and the bigger words are the ones that got mentioned most often. When we've sort of categorized that up in the bar chart, though, the most frequently provided responses related to the accommodation available, the weather, price, scenery, accessibility of the destination in terms of location and travel time, and the choice of activities available. But digging into these factors and what's important to people when they're choosing destinations further, we also asked a question where we listed the elements which you can see on the screen there, and we asked everyone to rate their importance when they were choosing a destination for an adventure holiday. So the aspects most frequently rated as being extremely important at the top of the chart were attractive scenery, nature and wildlife, and accommodation suited to people doing outdoor activities. But as you can see again with the little arrows we've got on the right of the chart, there were some variations in the importance of different aspects to different groups. So for example, those people in that kind of hard adventure group were more likely to say that beaches and long distance routes were important in their choice of destination, while the people in the softer end of the market were more likely to say that they would be looking for low-level routes for different abilities and cycle hire facilities, so more things that allowed them to start and try activities for the first time sometimes. We asked a similar question regarding other sort of more general elements and the importance of those in choosing a destination for an adventure holiday. So again, similar format, and the most important ones at the top of the chart overall. So the availability of local food and drink, the ease of access to a destination by car, attractions to visit, traditional towns and villages to visit, and historic places to visit were rated as extremely important by at least a quarter or more of the total market, each of those. But again, you can see there's some quite interesting variations within the market that we picked up on. So, for example, those in the hard adventure segment were more likely to rate a mix of activities to do and a commitment to sustainable tourism as being important. They were sort of above average in terms of ticking those boxes. However, those in the soft segment were more likely to rate having a mix of activities to do other than outdoor ones as being extremely important. So that group, as you might imagine, looking to engage in activities and adventure tourism type activities as the main part of the trip, but also looking to do other things as well as part of their visit to the destination. So that gives a little bit of general information about the things that people are looking to get from an adventure holiday, but let's now look at the findings in relation to specific destinations that would be considered for adventure holiday, and where Aberdeenshire sits within that competitive set. Okay, so respondents, first of all, were shown this list of destinations, as you can see in the charts here, and then they were asked to select any they would consider for an activity holiday or short break. So we've got the responses from people who live in Scotland on the left and people who live in the north of England on the right. And we've split the bars to show for a short break in green and for a longer holiday, sort of 4 days or longer, in blue, because we've got quite different responses. So among Scots, Northern Scotland was the most frequently selected option, both for short breaks and longer holidays, positively. For those living in Northern England, the north of Scotland was also the most frequently selected option for longer holidays, slightly ahead of Cornwall, only just. However, it was less frequently perceived as a potential short break destination compared to some of the other destinations. As we'll come on to, drive time and accessibility is important, particularly for a short break. We then moved on and we asked after that question, for respondents were asked without any prompting, so again, an open-ended question, to type in where they would consider going if they were taking an activity holiday in Scotland. And remember, we recruited people on the basis of they were non-rejectors of a trip to Scotland north of the central belt. So as you can see from the word cloud, we got a really wide range of responses typed in. We didn't specify the type of places you type. We just said, where would you go? So we've got a mix of regions and specific towns and villages and destinations within there. We've then coded up the answers that people typed in into the regions which are shown in the chart on the left, based on if they said Highlands, they went in there, but if they said a place in the Highlands, we'd also put them in there, and so on. So what you can see is by far the highest percentage of people reference destinations in the Highlands. And within that 43%, we have 3% specifically referenced the Cairngorms. We also have fairly high percentages mentioning Loch Lomond and the Trossachs, or places within there, Argyll and the Isles, and Edinburgh and the Lothians. Now, Aberdeenshire is quite far down the list. Just 2% of people specifically mentioned at this question Aberdeenshire or places within Aberdeenshire. So moving on, and we wanted to probe further about where Aberdeenshire sits within the set against other destinations. Respondents were next shown a list of potential destinations as listed on this chart, and an outline map showing where these different places were was put on the screen to help them. And then they were asked to rate how appealing each of these was as a place to visit for a holiday or short break where activities were the key part of the trip. So as you can see here, levels of appeal were highest for Loch Lomond, Trossachs in the Stirling area, Fort William and Loch Aber, other places in the Highlands, and Argyll and Isles. Using this measure, Aberdeenshire was rated as extremely or quite appealing by 43% of respondents. So if we were to rank the areas that we have here, that would put Aberdeenshire 14th out of the 17 different areas shown here. So quite low in the consideration sort of rate at this point. However, we went further. So we then had a question where we asked respondents to read the text, which is in italics and grey on this screen. So a short descriptive piece of text explaining what Aberdeenshire offers, where it is, and so on, accompanied by these photographs, which are shown on the left. So the survey was done online, so people had a chance to read this, then to look at the photographs. Now, with this description, the percentages rating the area as extremely or quite appealing, so that's the green bar on the chart on the right, were a lot higher than in the preceding question when we just had Aberdeenshire listed within a set of other destinations within Scotland. So we feel that this increased appeal when the destination, when we've given a description of the destination and some photographs, does provide us with a bit of a gauge of the potential opportunity for the destination, given information with awareness raised, with something to look at and understand. There's a great potential to move to this higher level of appeal, and these people are convertible almost, from, given this sort of input. So that's quite a key finding, but the challenge is, well, how do we attract this audience of people who love what they hear about Aberdeenshire when they're given this information? So in this next few charts, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the strengths that come through about the destination, but also some of the maybe negative perceptions which we need to think about and tackle. Okay, so First of all, those people who, after reading that description and seeing the photographs, had said that Aberdeenshire was appealing to them, they were asked another open-ended question, so we got unprompted responses, why it was they said that. What was it that made Aberdeenshire appealing to them? So a lot of responses, as you can see in the word cloud again. When we categorised these up, though, scenery, beautiful countryside and views, the wide variety of outdoor activities that could be done, the coast, including, importantly, beaches and harbours, good walks and walking routes, for some, ease of access to the area close to home, and for some, the diverse landscape and terrain. These were all like the key strengths that came through from this open-ended response in terms of things that stood out to people as what they liked most about Aberdeenshire. There is a flip side of some sort. You know, there's 16% of respondents didn't rate Aberdeenshire as appealing in that earlier question. We asked them, well, why do you say this as well? So amongst this sort of smaller percentage, we can see that the most commonly provided responses related to the distance from home. So a general preference for other destinations. People would just sort of mention, well, I actually like this place best, I go there. And there's also a proportion of people who said it was almost a bit too familiar. You know, we didn't include people who lived in Aberdeenshire in the survey, but, you know, maybe it was somewhere that they had relatives and so on. They went there a lot for other reasons, so they wanted to try somewhere else. So to dig into these strengths and weaknesses a bit further, respondents were asked to rate Aberdeenshire as an activity, holiday and short break destination on the basis of the factors which are listed on this chart. So following this approach, around half gave wildlife in Aberdeenshire the top very appealing rating. So this was the thing that came out as the strongest draw when we presented this list of different aspects of the destination. And then we also had towards the top there, you know, over 2/5 of people saying that local food and drink, towns and villages to visit, and being able to access the Cairngorms National Park were also all very appealing aspects of the destination. As the arrows show, though, there were again some differences within the market, different activity groups and so on. A couple of examples to pull out there. For example, access to the Cairngorms National Park appealed more to those people in the hard adventure segment, possibly because of the types of activities they could see themselves doing there, while being able to visit historic places, distilleries, craft breweries, and so on was more appealing to the soft segment, sort of fitting in with that desire for that group to do other things in addition to outdoor activities. Okay, and we also asked people regarding if they were visiting Aberdeenshire for an activity holiday, for an adventure tourism holiday, who would likely be with them in their group. So the majority of people, 62% of people said that they would visit with their partner, a third would visit with family, 24% with friends. These aren't mutually exclusive options, so it might be family and friends that they tick both boxes. Interestingly, though, we also asked people who said they would visit with someone else, who wouldn't just go alone, whether they expected the others in their party to also take part in the outdoor activities. And the majority of people said they definitely or probably expected the others in the group to take part in the activities. That kind of tells us that we're looking at whole families or whole groups of friends doing things together. It's not a case of them splitting up and doing different activities, especially amongst the hard activity participants, especially amongst people who found Aberdeenshire extremely appealing, who were really keen on the destination. We also asked people, though, you know, if you were visiting Aberdeenshire, what form of transport would you use to get there? So as you can see, and again, we've split the Scots and the people residents of Northern England here, the majority of people thought they'd go in the car. And some of this might be related to the COVID period that we're in and so on, and there is an increased desire to travel by car versus public transport. However, nevertheless, you can see that is the majority of people. That said, a sort of significant minority, 17% of people in the north of England did say that they prefer to travel by train. Now, related to that, on the right, you can see we also asked people how long they'd be prepared to travel to reach an adventure holiday destination in general, and the average results are shown in this chart. So if you look at the total bars, so focus on those, we saw that on average, people would travel about 3.5 hours if they're taking a short break. And almost maybe 5.5 hours for a longer holiday. And we've plotted these sort of drive time catchments from Aberdeen city itself on these maps. And so you can see this could it helps us understand what is the target market, what is the catchment. It also helps us to sort of focus on, well, is there a bit of an issue, you know, possibly with people in north of England for a short break, seeing it's too far to travel, or people actually for, you know, it goes, the 5-hour drive time goes as far as Newcastle down the A1, but you're talking about more like 6 hours plus Leeds and Manchester. But there are possibly ways of tackling this issue regarding maybe traveling by rail, where the journey time can be shorter. So it's something to consider. Okay, so moving on to the sort of final section of results, looking at some findings, which we asked some questions regarding possible options for developing the adventure tourism product in Aberdeenshire. So as you can see in the chart, quite small font here, but respondents were essentially presented with this list of potential ways to make Aberdeenshire a better place to visit for outdoor activities, and then asked which of these they would like to see developed in the area. So the results you can see on the screen here are across all of our respondents, you know, soft to hard segments. So the largest percentage we look at this total market level who was given to the development of long distance circular off-road route for walking and hiking. Over half, 58% of respondents say, yes, I'd like to see that. That would make it the destination more appealing to me. And the other most commonly selected options were an improved network of routes for mountain biking, a new outdoor adventure park in forestry outside of Aberdeenshire for a hub for mountain biking, and a beachfront activity centre offering opportunities for water sports. So at the overall level, these are almost the sort of top 4 options people could select, and they could select more than one, I should say. What maybe gives a bit more of a granular view of the demand, though, it's more useful perhaps to look at this amongst the people who are interested in participating in the particular activities already. So when we look at it in this way, you know, we can see that there are quite much higher levels of interest amongst the groups that a facility would probably be targeted at the most. So we see 64% of those are into walking, 66% interested in cycling, would like to see the long distance route, circular route. 60% of mountain bikers would like to see an improved network of routes. 55% of mountain bikers would like to see the outdoor adventure park option, and 66% of those interested in water sports would like to see the beachfront activity centre, really high thing. So as you'd expect, there's a correlation between what you currently do and are interested in and whether you'd like to see a new facility created. Okay, so just the final part, you know, we've covered a lot of ground already today, and as you can see, you can really get into the nitty-gritty of the data and different activity groups and so on, and there are some clear differences between people who do soft, hard, moderate sort of type activities as well. We appreciate, though, however, some of you might want to dig further into particular activity groups and so on. So we've produced with Visit Aberdeenshire this set of what we call pen portrait summary reports, focusing on 8 of the key activity groups. So essentially we go from, on top left, short distance, low level walking groups, people who do that type of activity, most interested in that, to longer distance walkers, hill walkers, and then bottom we've got mountain biking, snow sports, water sports, some of the more extreme pursuits and so on. Each of these summary reports is available. Just brief, I won't talk through all the results in these, but they are, I would suggest that it's worth having a look at if you've got a particular niche activity group. And we pick up within these, who are the group, their demographics versus the sort of average market. What is it that makes them tick in terms of holiday goals and decision drivers and so on, some of which we've already covered, you know, when we've been talking about some of the results today, and also how appealing is Aberdeenshire for this particular group. So for example, with mountain bikers, you can see that access to the Cairngorms National Park and wildlife kind of over-indexed for this group versus the average for others. And also the media targeting. We talked a bit about social media and magazines and so on earlier, but we talk a bit more about this and specific to the activity group and what makes them different. So a really good resource I'd suggest for you to dig into further if you've got a particular activity group of interest alongside the broader materials. Okay, so I think that sort of completes the presentation part of this section. I think if my script's right, though, we now have a 10-minute comfort break. So if everyone could come back at 11 or thereabouts, we'll go into the breakout session and I'll explain what that's all about when we come back together.
Okay, it's 10 past. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, let's give it a moment for folk to come back. And Duncan, thank you very much for the session we've just been through. The pen portraits, sort of questions come up about the pen portraits. We will be sending links as to where you can find those. They are particularly useful. I know that our marketing team at Visit Aberdeenshire found them very useful, putting together sort of the plans for going to market, to start promoting the region, some of the first steps we've taken, and particularly useful to refer to, particularly useful for our media buyer as well. So all good stuff there. I wonder if we can get the screen down that's saying 10-minute comfort break.
Yep. I can stop sharing.
Duncan, you're in control of that. Great.
Yep, there we go.
We'll move on to our second breakout session. Same drill as before. You'll get a message inviting you to move into your breakout room. And this is very much about using the insights, taking what we've heard over the last hour or so, and thinking about how we can apply it. So we've broken to 4 different themes, slightly different themes to look at. So shortly you'll see a pop-up on your screen, and that would invite you to click and go to your allocated rooms. You'll see the theme come up on the screen when we get to it, and the different 4 different themes to discuss, ranging from marketing to product development. And we'll have 15 minutes to go through that, and then we'll rejoin, and those of us who are facilitating the discussions will have a quick feedback to the room, and then we'll manage any questions that are cropping up throughout. So hopefully that's the cue for a pop-up to appear on the screen to invite you to go to your breakout. So I'll see you all back here in about 15 minutes. So we're all back in the room, I think, now. I hope your conversations were as stimulating as ours in the room that I was in. We're going to have a quick feedback from the facilitators from the different rooms for a few minutes, and then we can go to any questions that have arisen so far, and indeed any other questions that might arise over the next 10 or 15 minutes. So just pause myself from speaking for a moment. I'm looking at the other facilitators. So perhaps, Duncan, I can go back to you first, then Jim, then Deirdre, and then I'll take it from there.
Happy to feedback, go in that order. Yep. So yeah, I mean, we had a really good conversation, and it'll be hard to challenge it to summarize it in 3 minutes. But essentially, we were talking about, how to promote Aberdeenshire, the destination Aberdeenshire. What are the USPs? And obviously, we're in this situation where there is a low level of awareness of the destination amongst the market, and knowing the difference between Aberdeenshire and the Highlands and so on, really knowing what's there. But as soon as people do discover the area, the level of appeal rises greatly. So we talked a bit about, well, what are the key assets that should be talked about in messaging? We used the words a hidden gem, as in, this Aberdeenshire is an area once discovered, has got so much there, but people don't necessarily know it's there until they go there. And once they come, they start telling everyone, and will come again and again. And that can be something which can be almost a bit of kudos about, look at this different place that I'm at. In terms of what is there, though, we also talked about this kind of sea to summit, essentially the diversity of the landscapes, the activities possible within that area, the range from more extreme to more gentle, and also the sort of dawn in the D is almost this kind of thing which can thread you from sea to summit, and also alongside that, you've got the D-side way. So I think certainly we talked a bit about that, these kind of real unique things. And also a big key thing was the Cairngorm National Park. People imagine that's in the Highlands just. There's a bit too much sort of maybe thinking around local authority boundaries, but it's really important to emphasize that this area does include a large part of the Cairngorms National Park. So lots of opportunities there, lots of kudos. Aberdeenshire, the word Aberdeenshire doesn't mean lots to people. It's certainly in the north of England. So I think we need to be thinking about the naming of the destination and the sort of how it's branded as well. So a lot's came out of it though, but I'll probably hand over to others now because I'll go on for hours otherwise.
Okay, thank you, Duncan. I hand on to Jim now, and then Deirdre.
Yeah, thank you. We had a really useful discussion in our group. It cut too short, unfortunately, on working together, collaboration. Came up in our first breakout session, actually, naturally, people talking about working together and working across the sector, as well as reaching out to other parts of the tourism industry as well, the benefits that will provide. So it's not so much about competition in the area, it's about collaboration, and with some really good ideas that came through, engaging our young people in schools and so on, about who maybe at the moment undertake a lot of these activities as fun things to do at the weekends, but actually letting them see that there's a career in this whole area. So that was a really interesting input into the discussion. And then Glenn Tanner, really interesting views there about putting ourselves in the shoes of the consumer and using the research to really understand what the consumer is looking for, and realizing as a business, you can't provide everything they want. So you need to reach out, recognize we can't do everything. Who do we partner with? But the concern there, that's always been there, and it's a practical concern, I think, for everyone, is about the things like insurance and liability. Who's going to be, how do you deal with these sorts of issues? And interesting that Dan and Rachel from Well Discovery, who are a relatively new business, they take a sustainable, very much is around sustainability and so on. And their belief is that you can definitely get around that by building meaningful relationships, having memorandums of understanding and so on. So there are barriers to a certain extent, but there are things which can be overcome if there's willingness on both sides. And then another important point was that adventure tourism, there's lots of expertise in the Northeast, but we should also be looking across to our nearest neighbours, if you like, in Aviemore, in Speyside, where very much there is so much experience in that area. Can we lean on them a little bit more? And through the likes of the CBP and so on, there are ways in there, and that's something which we should be thinking about. We also talked about technology and the importance of having decent websites and so on that bring people in. Far too much to cover in too short a time, but I'll type up the notes from this one that will be shared with everybody anyway.
Marvellous, thank you very much, Jim. I'm going to move on to Deirdre now. If you could just let us know what subject you were looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. We were looking at marketing, and specifically looking at marketing your business. So the key questions we were tackling were the implications of findings for how you might describe and promote your product, and also whether it prompted any of the businesses to review the channels to market that they were using to reach potential customers. So in a similar vein, lots of discussion, and poor Marie got cut off midpoint. So I need to find out what the end of the sentence was from Marie for our group. But yes, we talked about, everybody commented on the research being interesting. We talked about some surprising findings as well. For example, we were quite surprised Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire was so low down. So we might come on to talk about that in the Q&A in terms of the perception and overcoming the perception, that kind of that golden nugget question. Some of the businesses talked about being able to use the research to further strengthen the way that they combine adventure tourism with other aspects of the visitor experience. For example, looking at food and drink, or cultural experiences or historical experiences. And we talked about the need to connect in with other businesses in order to deliver that, to increase the appeal for the visitor, and hopefully then link that to making Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire top of the visitors list. We looked at needing to change the perception of the region. We talked about that aspect that's come up before, where, and it was highlighted earlier, once somebody's been, they're very positive about it and they recommend to family and friends. So how do we kind of cut through that and harness that, I suppose, if you like, more. We talked about the value of the pen portraits, and also the scale of the soft, medium and hard, and being able to use some of that in more targeted messaging with particular segments. And we were also talking about the challenge in the area around what is our anchor, what is our hook, what do we hang our hat on in terms of adventure tourism. So that clearly wasn't tackled fully in the time that we had, but Ollie was giving us some good examples from New Zealand and his experiences there. And I think that's at the point at which Marie got cut off, because we were linking it into community initiatives and authenticity of experience. So I mean, adventure tourism is massive, but when you're linking it into these other areas, clearly that's large as well. And for some, it was in terms of channels, it was reassuring that the research helped to reinforce the channels that they were using. And again, going back to the pen portraits, that they would be valuable in being able to pick out particular channels that would work for these different businesses.
Thank you, Deirdre. An awful lot of ground covered there in group, and I think a lot of the marketing knowledge is also beneficial for us from a destination level as well. The fourth group, in my group, we were looking at product development, what's been picked up from the insight that could perhaps stimulate some new developments, adjustments, adaptation of products to go to market. Now, we looked at this in three different areas. We looked at it from the point of view of the destination as a whole, quite a bit of discussion about means of travel as well, and also the sort of business infrastructure. At the destination end, there was a bit of discussion about, well, picture behind me, that's a good day at Glenshee or a good year at Glenshee. What happens on a bad year at Glenshee and places like that? Obviously, the need for infrastructure or development of the product to make it something viable year-round, and also to cover off those bad years, not just in skiing, but looking at it as a year-round destination across the whole region. Our discussion on means of travel I think it's going to throw up some interesting challenges. Coming out of the insight there, the reliance upon the private car to access rural areas, both that's obviously really, really high. Part of that might be pandemic related, but obviously we were discussing about, many of you will recognize this, that kit is involved quite often. An own kit is involved when you're heading up, taking your bikes, taking your climbing kit, whatever it is. Doesn't always lend itself to public transport. And even if it does, there needs to be that infrastructure, there needs to be that product in place to get you from the railhead, from the airport, onto your destination, and indeed around. So there is going to be a challenge coming up, not least from legislation, societal change in terms of internal combustion engines, moving towards electric vehicles, not sure where they come from, but electric vehicles, and the need for quite substantial infrastructure investment to marry those two agendas together, the need to travel privately, and the move towards a net carbon zero economy. But you could also put into the mix there potential product developments in terms of public or other private transport in the region. It was prompted that we shouldn't just perhaps look at the Scotland and the north of England. There is a market further south. There is a market that will be, infrastructure and facilities in place, willing to jump on an aeroplane and come up with or without bicycles. And I guess that links into that final mile onward travel discussion as well. And we were just getting onto some of the business facilities that are needed to accommodate the bike cleaning, the bike secure storage, and those aspects that make the accommodation that is out there in the rural environment more market ready to meet the customer demand. So quite a bit going on there. It's a good discussion all round. So I'll pause at that point, because that neatly brings us towards the end of our session. But I know we've been having quite a number of questions cropping up. So at this stage, I'm going to pass on to Deirdre just to pick up on the questions that have been raised, and hopefully we can address some of the answers before we wrap up.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. Yes, we've got a question here that's come in from Ian Mitchell. And it's referring to the travel time that was taken, the question that talked about travel time for short break and the holiday split. So Ian's question is, how long would you be prepared to travel to reach your destination for? The residents from England came in at 6 hours and 21 minutes. From the presentation today, it looked like less. Do we know the reasoning for this change? I
can maybe answer that one, Deirdre. Yeah, I'm presuming Ian is basing the 6 hours from an earlier sort of the presentation that we did. What we did actually when we're analysing and producing the final report is averages are always a bit of a strange thing, but we found there were a few kind of outlier people in there, a very small number, who said they would travel for 20 hours, some people who obviously have got a great appetite to travel a long way. So we decided to sort of clean the data essentially of those, because we felt like it just wasn't representative. It is a broader thing though, actually. With these figures, we have to be careful using averages, because no one person probably said 5 hours and 31 minutes. It was essentially, we do have a lot of people who would travel further, but we've also got an equal proportion who would travel less of a distance. So I think the wider insight really from that is that we need to think about just how far people would be prepared to travel for any type of holiday, in particular short breaks, and just bear that in mind in our marketing. It has to be appealing enough to travel a long way or find alternative ways to get people there within the time they're prepared to travel. Hopefully that helps.
That's great. Thanks, Duncan. We don't have any other questions in from our attendees, but I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. One for yourself and then probably one for Chris. The one I wanted to touch on was it's clear that there's a large opportunity for us in adventure tourism, and that was there before COVID. And now, subject to opening back up, I think the opportunity has become even greater. And I wanted to link it to your last wave of the Scottish Tourism Index, where you talked about these new holiday makers, the Scots that will be undertaking holidays in Scotland this year. And I think it was about 51% where would be holidaying in Scotland who wouldn't otherwise normally do so. And I wondered whether you saw an opportunity for that particular group within adventure tourism. And if so,
sorry,
you're going to take that, yeah?
Yep, absolutely. Definitely an opportunity. I mean, last year, we thought it was a one-off year, obviously, and it's not looking like it anymore, but it clearly did provide an opportunity for the Scottish tourism industry to showcase what it could provide in very difficult circumstances, given all the restrictions that were still in place, showcase what it could provide to people who wouldn't otherwise be taking a Scottish summer holiday. Otherwise, they would have been overseas or somewhere else. And we saw a lot of, as you say, new, in inverted commas, visitors, people who would normally be doing that from Scotland, who encouragingly in that final wave, when we asked them what their plans were going forward, made it very clear that they didn't see it as a one-off. They would do it again because they'd enjoyed reconnecting with their local, their own market, if you like, their own country. And I think, irrespective of what happens this year in terms of the pandemic, any holiday taking which will hopefully be possible is going to be domestic, undoubtedly. It's going to be like it was last year to a large extent. Yes, international travel may open up later in the year, but for our main season, the Scottish market is the obvious one to focus on, and hopefully we can do that. And there's a huge opportunity because people will still want to be outdoors. They'll still be wanting to do things outside, activities, things that are that bit different from what they would normally be doing. That's where the appeal will be. And I think there's a huge opportunity for probably all of the businesses here today in that regard. Now, I'm not putting down the fact that you're not going to have the same access to international markets or even other parts of the UK. That's a big loss. But making the most of what you've got with the local market, they're the lowest hanging fruit. They're the people who are most easily able to come back again. We could create quite a robust base going forward for local, real domestic tourism for your businesses this last year and this year. I don't know, that's a bit of a rambling answer, Deirdre. Hopefully that helps.
No, it was good. It was fine compared to my rambling questions, so thank you. Chris, I was going to come to yourself with one of the findings around the appeal of the destination pre-description and the appeal of the destination post-description. Before the respondents were shown the images and the description of the area, the appeal was at 43%, and it jumped, and it did jump to 85% once they had seen what could be on offer here and read a bit about that kind of the description of the area. And sorry, it's maybe a bit of a tough question, but I wondered whether you had any comments or wanted to share what we're doing at VA or what we're planning to do around how to get our message out there to try and share more of the imagery and more of what we have on offer in the area of adventure tourism.
Thanks, Deirdre. I think the scenario we had there of a name, perceptions before the description and perceptions after is probably common to other areas of our work. It's not purely confined to adventure tourism. We are comparatively, as a region, a lesser known destination. Depending on what particular market you're looking at, but also the branding as well. I think it's something which was highlighted in the research. The name Aberdeenshire doesn't necessarily resonate as strongly in some areas as others. So, as you pointed out, a lot of our work is geared around changing perceptions, not just establishing awareness of the northeast of Scotland, but also what it has to offer, and driving people towards that decision to make a visit, to come here, to enjoy it, obviously, through the great experience, then ideally recommend and repeat in the future. It's been the most challenging marketing environment I think I can ever remember over the last year, never knowing whether we would be open for business or whether our target audiences would be able to travel to us when we were open for business. And of course, it's pretty much a stalemate at the moment. But my sense is we have to be on the front foot. We have to be in that consideration set for visitors, for whatever reason they want to get away, for whatever is the motive for their great escape when they can. So we are already in market promoting the region as that great escape for whenever that may be, later in the spring, the summer. And this year, well, this financial year, so last summer and now this spring, and then looking ahead, we're also using the insight from this research and running a specific adventure tourism campaign. Now, this is a bit of a first wave. We've gone to market as Aberdeenshire and under the Great Escape banner that we are using for our mainstream campaigns, albeit the content within the promotion and the audiences are very, very well profiled towards people with an interest and enthusiasm for walking, cycling, and all the other aspects that we've been hearing about today. That can only grow, that can only evolve as we develop a strong identity for this part of the world. Now, whether it ends up being called, we refer to it as Aberdeenshire or something else, remains to be seen. But that's the path we're on to raise the profile of this part of the world, whatever we may call it. The important thing is that people get here, whatever they're referring to it as, and ultimately it's heads on beds, bums on seats, and money through the till is what it comes down to.
Thanks, Chris. And just before I hand over to you, I've got an observation rather than maybe a question from Claire or Bruce. There is a distinction between the definition of Highlands from a council perspective and the area on the ground. The eastern Cairngorms up to Dinnet is in the Highlands, and we can use that as well as increasing awareness of Aberdeenshire. And that's such a pertinent comment. And I know it's actually come out earlier in the project. I'm looking at Jim, who's nodding his head, because that's an area that we have discussed. So thanks, Claire, for that.
And that's a really important point. People don't recognise local authority boundaries, and that also is a strong stimulus to work in partnership with other areas, other destinations, because a visitor will look at this part of Scotland, not Aberdeenshire, Speyside, Aviemore, or elsewhere. So it is important that we take that collaborative approach with other parts, with our neighbours.
Maybe if I can just add one quick thing on that one, just going back to that earlier conversation we had. I'm old enough to remember the old Grampian Highlands and Aberdeen Tourist Board, and I just wonder if Grampian Highlands is something that could be used a little bit more within the promotion to get that Highlands point across, because that makes a huge difference to people who don't necessarily know where you are. But bringing in the Highlands angle, I think, is really, really important. Just an observation from me.
I think it's certainly worth testing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris, Jim and Duncan, for taking those questions. And if anybody has any further questions after today, just do send them in to us. It's an ongoing conversation. So please, once you've had a chance to digest the information and had a look at the pen portraits, please get in touch with Yvonne and the team or myself if it's research specific. Chris, I'd like to hand over to yourself for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. It's been a really, really good session. Very interactive, very engaging, and from our perspective at Visit Aberdeenshire, there's quite a lot of useful information come out of the commentary throughout the whole session. To wrap up, I'd like to thank Jim, I'd like to thank Duncan, and I'd also most of all like to thank all of you for taking time out to join us this morning, and for your contributions. I trust that you'll have at least one or two nuggets to take away and to apply to your business or your projects, whatever you are working on as you plan ahead. Now, as we mentioned earlier, we have recorded this, and we'll edit out all the ums and ahs and share that along with all the links to the pen portraits and the research itself. So you can refer back. I know there's quite a lot to take in at a relatively fast pace during these sessions, but nevertheless, I hope you found enough within that. Finally, I refer back to the North East Adventure Tourism project, and the next stage in the development of the NEAT project is to canvass your views on the ambition of the project and what that will mean in practice. And to that extent, many of you, those of you who are operators within Aberdeen and the Aberdeenshire area, will soon be receiving a pack with more details about the project around its ambition, its vision, and what that, as I say, what it means in practice, alongside a series of questions on an online survey. And we'll be absolutely delighted if you could complete that and get that information back to us. That'll be coming out in the next week or so, and that will really help us to inform the direction of the project itself. So much more on that to come. And I'll finish on that forward-looking note that clearly we've got a great opportunity here. Just looking back and referring back to the Scottish Tourism Index, I'm also delighted there's going to be another wave of that from Jim and Duncan. I get the sense that we're fishing in the right pond here, thinking about the assets we have and what the consumer is looking for. There is a great opportunity in the adventure tourism sector for the North East, tapped in some ways, but untapped in many other ways. So collectively, I'm looking forward to developing the NEAT project alongside many of you, and to hopefully developing a very successful sector here in the North East. So thank you all once again for joining us this morning, and we hope to see you all very soon.